Okay, I'm gonna explain this now. Hello, everyone. I was planning on making a new one from the prints that I was reviewing, but seeing as how certain things have been going on online, and I am very annoyed at the lack of people understanding certain things, I'm going to, in this video and the follow-up, which I'll make two today, as apologies for missing Friday, explain a few things so you understand the basics of rhetorical arguments, or at least a specific one, and fallacies, which are poor arguments. Now, this video will be on explaining reductio ad absurdum, which is a specific form of argument that's actually a solid one. It's an acceptable and logical form of argument. Now, what it translates to, out of Latin, is reduced to the absurd, and it's an effective summary of what the entire idea and form of argument is. See, reductio ad absurdum works on the basic premise of if x then y, but replaces one of the two variables while keeping everything else the same. So basically, what you do is you try to use a logical premise, or a supposed logical premise, and see if, when replacing the cause or the effect, you can make it absurd. Because the entire point is to see the logical conclusions of an argument if pushed to its limits. For example, it is okay to harm a person because they annoyed you can be reframed as, it is okay to murder a person because they annoyed you. That is the logical conclusion of that statement. If it's okay to harm someone because they inflicted a grievance upon you, then it is okay to murder them, because there is no statement of equivalence. You can only harm a person as they've harmed you, or proportional to how much they've annoyed you. There's no proportionality, so if someone annoyed you, following that same logic of harming because of it, you can murder someone because of it. It's absurd, yes, but that's the entire premise. If you can push a thing to its logical conclusions and it is absurd, then likely the entire premise you've built it off of is absurd in and of itself, and not tenable when it comes to an actual functional argument. See, that's just how the argument operates. It is effective in essentially taking something and putting it through the ringer by saying, okay, you believe X. What if X was something else? And would your argument still hold if so? Because if it does, and you say, no, that new thing is not something I agree with, then you're not truly defending X because of the argument. There's something else there. Again, if it is not acceptable at its absurd point, then it is not an acceptable reasoning for the normal point. Because, fundamentally, if it's the same logic, then it's a simple yes or no. And I have actually seen people say, yes, I do agree that the extreme should happen. For example, and this is unfortunate, but have you heard of a YouTuber by the name of Charles Perallo? I mostly know him because for some reason he keeps appearing in my feed with a bunch of Poles. Regardless, ignoring the Polish in the room, or rather his community, ignoring that and focusing on what he does, because he posts polls so often, you can, if you're curious like I am, go into them, read the comments, and see people's arguments. I once got into an argument with a person over whether or not it was okay or moral to sleep with a person who was vastly younger than you. Not pedophilia, but it's the whole difference in ages once you're consenting thing. That argument, which Perallo had as a poll question, and he legitimately agreed that, yes, if it was legal, then it is fine. Even if it was what we would call pedophilic. See, the entire point of the argument was about, basically, if something is acceptable just because it's legal, this person said yes. And so, within his own belief system, the logic held firm. However, the reason you push to these extremes is because, for most people, they say no. For example, if you told a politician that question of, well, we believe in X because everyone else does it, then simply ask, okay, well, if everyone else did this bad thing, then would it suddenly be okay? And they'd likely backpedal, because the logic of, we should do this because others are doing it, is a bad argument. And the extreme or absurd example does not have to be safe in terms of, what's acceptable to talk about. It could be slavery, pedophilia, murder, drug use, whatever. All can be used as examples because the entire point of the argument is to push things as far as they can go and see the conclusions that are reached. It does not matter if pedophilia is a sensitive topic. It's a very easy example to use, and one I have used, personally for Reductio ad Absurdum, because it is such a hated thing, justifiably, that it is absurd to make an argument for it. But if your reasoning perfectly supports it, well then, we're probably going to have some issues with your reasoning. And that is a problem. For you, not for me. If my entire argument is sound and I can point out that no, your logic makes no sense, I mean, it ain't my argument being heard here. But it is still a very real problem, especially when it comes to how people converse. Because, well, if you push things to the absurd and they don't stand, suddenly you have to make a new argument. And so oftentimes, I would actually advise, push things to their absurd on your own. Take your ideas and say, okay, how far does this go? Where does my reasoning lead to? Because if it leads to something bad, then you should probably fix it. Figure out why it led to something bad and adjust your reasoning as, reasonable. Because logically, if you have beliefs and they end up supporting things you do not agree with, that is a problem for you. It ain't a problem for the people who can exploit that argument to get a win, because as much as we may hate it, debate is often used just for victory. It's a problem for you, because what you stand for is not what you truly believe. Murder is wrong. I say that as an absolute, and I can argue it in my own way. If I had a belief that suddenly said, hey, murder is right, unequivocally, that is a problem for me. It is not a problem for the guy arguing against me who can easily prove that I am a hypocrite, or that I have not thought my positions through to the end. It is a problem for me. And so Reductio ad Absurdum is useful, not just for going against others, but for yourself, because it allows you to check yourself, but also remind others of what their conclusions actually mean. Because as much as we may hate it, there will be those who believe in the absurd, who believe in that. If the idea, for example, of consent's all that matters, let's take that. Consent's all that matters, and if people consent, live and let live. If that is taken to its logical conclusion, for example, children would be allowed to consent. Because, again, moral argument, we're not talking law here. And if we are talking law, then it should easily be reminded with people. The age of consent in some countries is 9, in others it's 12. It's not exactly even 18 for everyone. As much as we think that's unfortunate, that's just how it is. I do apologize, but I fixed the noise, so we should be good. But back to my statement. There are people who will 100% believe in those absurd things, those things that we hate or revile. And so, logically, we shouldn't support those things if we think they're wrong. But if our logic leads to them being correct, we have an issue. And so the best way to stop things from getting to that absurd point is to say, no, that is wrong. And why is it wrong? Logical reason A, B, and C. and importantly, avoiding those arguments which lead to those absurd conclusions. So reductio ad absurdum works well for this because when you're arguing, you point out that absurdity and you realize quickly, okay, this argument is bad for what I'm actually trying to argue, or if you're the person arguing this and the person agrees, okay, this person actually believes in this thing I consider absurd. Some people do. If you legitimately asked a utilitarian, like strict utilitarian, about certain things regarding deaths and all that, you would be uncomfortable if you believed in more strict ethics. Now, I bring all this up because reductio ad absurdum is an important part of rhetoric. It's a very effective piece of rhetoric, but also very good against specific fallacious statements, especially those that rely on bandwagoning or other nice-sounding arguments, which are empty in terms of actual logic. If someone says, well, everyone believes X, so we should too, then X could be charity. It could also be cannibalism. It could be freaking anything. Petting dogs, burning France, burning Germany, literally just take your pick. It could be anything, but because everyone else is doing it, then it's okay. That's a fallacy, and it's a bad argument. Reductio ad absurdum is very good at handling this because it brings that to bear. It forces you to realize you are literally just arguing on a bandwagon. So there must be something else to your beliefs. You can say X is a good thing. Okay, why? Why is it a good thing? What studies do you have? Or what reasoning do you have to lead to that conclusion? We are putting this in safe hands, for example, because the people you argue should do X are trustworthy for reasons A, B, and C. Or this is a good policy because it helps groups D, E, and F. And it's good to help people. Okay? Those are arguments that work. It's when your argument doesn't work and when you can replace it with literal pedophilia, murder, slavery, or just anything absurd, like we should give all the clowns rights more than people. I'm sorry, we should not just give all clowns extra rights just because they're clowns. That's absurd, but that's the entire point. It's to basically point out the absurdity of certain positions. And so it allows us to effectively address them. We should make arguments that have good logic. We shouldn't have arguments that can be reduced to the absurd. But while we are people, and while we make fallacious statements, reducing things to the absurd works. And as an internal check, it is very effective. I could 100% follow my reasoning to its absurd conclusions, and I am willing to accept them. Are you? If not, I would encourage introspection. Look into your beliefs and ask, how can I adjust this beyond what arguments I would currently make? Are they logical? Are they not? If I reduce them to the absurd, are they still good? If you can't answer those honestly, and be able to say yes or no, then look again. Truly assess them, and figure that. Understand that. And, how else can I say this, but make up your mind. Figure it out. Can't do anything else. Thank you for watching. I do hope you enjoyed.